Today, how many guys have used watercolors before? Kind of, sort of. Oh, most of you. Okay, cool. Let's make it easy. Alright, so lots of different ways to utilize watercolors. I'm just going to show you a small handful of different little techniques that you can use with your paper. Now, as you go through, you guys already have your character designs done up for the kid's story. Just kind of start on some printer paper. Keep in mind, it's going to bleed like the living bejesus because this is very thin paper, so it's not going to look as finished as your final version, which will be literally watercolor paper. It'll absorb the ink and the water in the actual paints in a different manner. Okay, so keep that in mind. Anyway, so let's start off. I'm just going to grab a watercolor brush. I have some of these set aside over here. You can feel free to rummage around and find other ones, but these are specifically watercolor brushes. They're kind of softer, a little bit more gentle tips to them, more than a harsh edge. I also have a sponge brush here, and we only have 2 of these, but you're more than welcome to use them if you just want to lay down some solid color in the background real quick. It's a good way to do it. I have some salt. I'll show you a technique with that, as well as a little wooden scribe we can actually scribe into the paper. It might not work so well with this printer stuff, but it definitely will whenever you use your watercolor paper. Okay? So, simply to activate, you take some agua and get it in there and get it working. Okay?
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Never would have guessed.
Water and it makes color. Who would have thought? Now, a lot of these have little trays built into the top right here. You're more than welcome to kind of mix some colors. Let's say you wanted more of like a fire red. Get some orange and some yellow up in there. You can mix up in here. Another option is you can actually take one of these, the little paint trays that we normally use, and if you were going to use a whole, maybe just a bunch of red, right? Well, instead of keeping going back and forth, make some, right? Pull it off to the side. Have it ready to go so you can use the same color over and over again. That way. Maybe you want to mix and match, have different values, shades and tints of your red. So you could do that, have a whole red tray if you wanted to. You get the idea. Remember, the more water you add to something, it might appear a little bit darker because we're mixing them on a white background here. But the more water you add, the lighter it's going to be. Just to show you real quick, this probably won't dry very well. It's not very porous paper, but see, as time goes on, it'll come on thicker, and so on. So the more water you add, obviously, the thinner it's going to be. You get the idea. So thin, thick, right? More paint that you get right out of the tube, it's going to be much more bold. Either way, this is still going to be a very soft palette tone. And again, we want that. We're doing a kids coloring book, so we want it to be pretty soft in general nature. So let me rinse this out real quick. There are different brushes will give you different effects. Okay. Now again, I don't know exactly to what extent you guys have done with your painting before, but primarily when it comes to watercolor, you're going to use 2 different brushes. You have just kind of a fine tip, smaller paintbrush, something you would get from a little kid's paintbrush set, right? And they're actually really good paintbrushes. And a more squared off kind of chiseled edge. The more chiseled edge is going to give you a much squarer, squared off kind of paint stroke. Okay, so you could get, let's say you want to do like the side of a house, you know. You could get kind of the wooden planks using a much squarer brush. If you wanted more detail, you could get in and do more kind of brush stroke ideas, from thick to thin and from light to dark. Okay? So there's that. There's those 2. Those are going to be your main kind of bread and butter when it comes to watercolors. Other ideas, now this one isn't necessarily a watercolor brush. This is more of an acrylic brush. But again, more of that chiseled edge if you want to get in there, get a really thick, bold line. Maybe if you have some lettering, not that you guys necessarily will, but in the future, you can do lettering with watercolors as well. And again, still that kind of gentle-natured feel, and kind of get that kind of chiseled edge to it. Okay? So far, so good. Okay. Another brush, I think we only have a handful of them, but a really good brush, especially when you're doing your background, is something like this, a fan brush, right? Called so because it looks like a fan, right? Rocket science, I know. But they're not necessarily always used for watercolors, but they work really well if you wanted to add just kind of a quick, soft brush stroke in the background. Just add a little bit of tone. It'll give you these nice little strokes where it kind of clumps up on the brush. So depending on how you utilize it, you can actually get some neat little effects. Let's say you want to do water, you could get kind of little sand strokes like this. Or if you want to do waves, you get the idea.
That's very
Fan brush is a pretty cool guy to use, but again, I think we're limited to how many we have, so use them and share them as well. All right, so techniques. All right, now again, bear with me, I don't know how many of these will actually work on printer paper, but we'll try it. There's a technique called wet on wet, okay? Simply put, you wet the canvas first. I use the spray bottle, but you can use just a straight up brush if you wanted to. And then you get your watercolor and proceed to go on top. What's going to happen is because it's already wet, it's actually going to fade out much quicker and it will bleed much quicker into the paper. Because the paper is already absorbent, it will pull those colors out even further. So again, we're talking like a background color would be really good. You don't have to use the spritzer. You can just paint on some water, go back with your red, paint on more, and again, see how it quickly bleeds and fades away, right? So that's a good technique for background, something really, really soft. Or even to say, maybe your character has a baby blue shirt on, right? And you can't get baby blue because we only have so many colors, so this is a way of toning that blue down, just kind of watering it down, okay? So that's wet on wet. Other ideas that you can use, different techniques. Salt is a really interesting thing that you can utilize in your watercolors because it's water-based. Obviously, salt draws up water, so we're using a little bit of chemistry here. But what you can do, there's two different ways of doing it. Let's say you painted this on. Hopefully, if I get it wet enough, you'll be able to see it. It works better whenever it's drying, but we can try. Pretty quickly, you're going to see the paint's going to start to pull around the little granules of salt. It's going to pull right around those. The rest of the water is going to be absorbed and pulled out. So what'll happen, if you want to pass it around, you can see it if it gets closer. When it dries, it'll be more obvious. But you can see the paint actually pulls toward these little granules, and you get basically little tiny polka dots.
Yeah, she taught her to do stars with those.
Oh, okay. All right, so you guys already know that. Vice versa, you can do it in reverse as well. Put the salt on first, and then you go back over top. That's a little bit more noticeable. Again, it's the same effect, but just different styles. Okay? So if you've done that before, then that should come as no shock or surprise. Okay? Other ideas that you can do. If you have, get that clean. If you have a more of a sponge brush, you can absorb all of your paints right up in there, okay? And then brush on, again, kind of just a background tone. Again, we're talking soft color choices, but what's nice about this, because it's so large, you can actually mix and match your colors. So you would be able to, let me show you here. Let's see, I wanted some green and some purple. Now all of a sudden I can get two different color choices in my same palette stroke. And those two colors will start to mix and match as you go along. You see that? See? Yeah. Good. Okay. The last one, like I said, is a little bit difficult to show because of the paper that we're using. But you can actually use these little wooden scribes I have on the side and actually cut through, and it's not going to work on here. You can actually cut through your paper as it's drying. So think about whenever you put water onto a surface that has a cut in it, the water obviously pulls in, so you can cut ahead of time. Right? Thank you. You can cut ahead of time, and as it dries, it'll pull that ink into the groove that you made. So if you need like a really very tiny defined surface, it can cut into that, and vice versa. Again, I don't know if it'll work on this paper, but you can paint in and actually, yeah, it's not going to work. You can pull the color aside with one of these as well. So, long story short, take your paper, just use some printer paper, use some scratch, whatever you want to get your hands on. Mess around with the paints, get comfortable with them, so whenever I give you the select size of watercolor paper, you feel comfortable enough to jump right into it and do your finished version of your page. Okay? Pretty good? Understand? All right. That's it.